Welcome into yet another Dynasty rookie profile where we are diving deep into the numbers for these 2024 rookie prospects for the purpose of Dynasty/fantasy football. If this is the first time that you have seen these videos, we have a few more out on some wide receivers in the 2024 class. Today, we're talking about wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU. And the purpose of these videos, again, if this is your first time, is just to kind of better equip ourselves when it comes to the Dynasty rookie drafts. Looking at players that we like and don't like, the things we like about them, the things we don't like about them, just to see if we can just, again, make better decisions. A lot of it's a crapshoot on who's going to be good and who's going to be bad, or who's going to bust. But, if we can look at some numbers and find some things and tendencies that we like, either from historical data or, about these 2024 players, it can lead us to uncover some gems, hopefully in the second, third, fourth round. I always say this: the first 5-6 picks of these rookie drafts, maybe 7-8 in this year, are already kind of determined. It's when we get to the late first, the second, the third, the fourth round. That's when the people who are doing their research and looking at film and the numbers kind of separate themselves. So we're going to jump right into it here. And again, we are looking at Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU. And we see the measurables here: 6'4", 208, so really good size for a receiver. Things that are still coveted despite the NFL, being a little bit more favorable to smaller players and players that are lighter. Teams still covet this size at receiver, this 6'4", 208. So that's obviously a plus in his book. 2023 was his best year: 68 catches, 1,177 yards, 17 touchdowns. Obviously, LSU and Jaden Daniels, Heisman Trophy winner. Their offense was on fire. Malik Neighbors, who's going to be potentially a top 5 pick, was also on this team. So two really good receivers and a quarterback who's potentially top 5. Right now, according to Mock Draft Database, which again compiles a lot of mock drafts, he's a late first projection. I have seen him as high as like the early 20s, so I guess you can call that a mid first. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes. I find it hard to think. I don't think he's going to get out of the first round. Again, just the combination of his size, his speed, the type of production that he had in his last year. I just don't see him getting away out of there. So looking more deep into the numbers here, looking at the yards per route run, was at 2.61, which again is a solid number. That was last year, by the way. We would like to see it a little bit closer to 2.9 or north of 2.9 yards per route run. A good stat to look at in terms of the good receivers that are having big years. They have a really good yards per route run. So 2.6 isn't bad, but it's less than what we hopefully want. 13.9 ADOT still, that's where we're starting to get a little bit high there. The 13.9 average depth of target. Again, we want to shoot for around 10.5 to 12.5, in my opinion, 10.5 to 13. We don't want it too low. We don't want it too high. Too low, you're getting a lot of screens and gadget plays. Too high, you're more of a deep threat than anything else. We kind of we want it right in that sweet spot. So he's close enough to where I'm not necessarily concerned about it at all. Yards after catch per reception at 5.7, solid number there. Contested catch percentage at 58.8%. That's really good. Again, we've talked about it with our other videos. If you're doing a contested catch rate of 50% or higher, that's really good in my opinion. He's north of 50%. Love to see it, especially with that size. You expect that type of contested catch percentage with someone who's 6'4", some of the bigger receivers. So love to see that. 20%, a number that I've been looking at more recently is the contested target percentage. So how many of your targets were contested in college? Because I think when this is a lower number, like 15% or lower, it shows that you're creating separation, you're getting open a lot. Once we start to get around 20% or higher, it starts to become a little concerning that, a fifth or a quarter of your catches are contested, meaning you're not creating the space that's required. Now, stuff can skew that a little bit. Do they give him a lot of, bubble screens behind the line of scrimmage passes, which would lower the number a little bit? Are they using him more as like a deep threat? So, things can skew it, but you hope over the course of an entire college career, which again, for Brian Thomas, we're looking at over 175 targets, that it kind of evens out a little bit. And again, we want to see this number just to be, lower than 20%, but again, 20% is not like a death note. There's some intriguing things here. Specifically, the drop percentage at under 7% is good. And for his career, he did have a big drop percentage in 2021, but he also only had 41 targets. So he's improved on that every year. 6.8% is fine. Anything under 7 to me is good, and that's what he was last year. And his contested catch percentage is obviously good, along with the size profile. Some things that I like about him. In terms of his snaps by positions, we see here wasn't used all over the field too much, which is a little bit concerning. Again, it could just be the offense you play in. It doesn't necessarily mean he can't play in the slot, but in college, he didn't really play in the slot his last year. We see here 87% out wide, only 10% in the slot, 2% in line as a tight end. Again, we like to see a little bit more 70-30 or even a bigger split, because the true difference makers at wide receiver in the NFL when it comes to fantasy production are the guys that play out wide when there's two wide receivers and can move to the slot to create that mismatch. The CD Lambs, the Justin Jeffersons, they play a lot of their snaps in the slot on 3 or 4 wide receiver sets because there's mismatches there. Not a lot of cornerbacks can translate to the slot. So we do like to see the ability to play in the slot more. And I'm not saying he can't, but we just didn't see it in college. So now we're looking at some other numbers here. The Dominator number is the percentage of passing or receiving production that you had in college. So over his 3-year career at LSU, he had 19% of the team's receiving offense over those 3 years. We see his single season high here is at 33%, which was obviously last year, his one big year in college. So he had over 33% of the team's production, which is really, really awesome to see, especially with someone as good as Malik Neighbors on the other side of him. Usually when you have a dominant receiver, a top 12, top 10, top 5 receiver next to you, that Dominator number is going to be lower. But, it was basically him and Malik Neighbors putting up the entire passing offense or receiving offense. Breakout age of 20 is good. Again, breakout age is the first year in which you had at least 20% of the team's receiving production. He was 20 years old when he did it. And again, that if you look at every fantasy relevant receiver since 2010, which I did, 70 out of the 78 receivers that have been fantasy relevant since 2010. And again, fantasy relevant for me is 2 seasons in the top 36 at wide receiver. So it's a pretty low bar, to be honest. But anyway, 78 receivers have been fantasy relevant since 2010. Only 8 of them have had a breakout age older than 20 years old in college. Now, I will say this with some of these players. I think COVID kind of messed up things. It kind of muddied the waters just a little bit. A lot of these guys that we're looking at this year, not Brian Thomas Jr., but some other guys that we're going to look at this year, their first year was the COVID year. And I think that just kind of messed everything up. But that being said, Brian Thomas Jr., his first year was 2021. So, didn't really mess it up. So again, we like to see this number at 20 years old at the worst. We really like to see it at 18 or 19 years old. So, Brian Thomas Jr., he was fine. His first 2 years in college, he had a 9% Dominator rating and then a 16%. So we saw improvement every year, which is great. We love to see that. 16% in your second year is not terrible. At least you're seeing some production there again. So that's promising to see. Would like to see this number be, we would like to see him break out as a 19-year-old, but again, it's not the be-all, end-all. And there's plenty of receivers who have been good who broke out at the age of 20. So we see his PFF grade, the best grade he's had in terms of his receiving grade at 74.2. And then a couple more things that I've been meaning to look at and I didn't look at with the other prospects is the man versus zone grades. And he's actually better versus man, not significantly, but also just 2 numbers that are kind of subpar in my opinion. So, we do like to see players be a little bit better in zone than man, just because the NFL plays more zone coverage. But overall, there's definitely some intriguing things. And again, I don't see Brian Thomas Jr. falling out of the first round. I think teams are going to covet this size, speed combination. He's projected to run in the mid 4.4s. His ability to make contested catches was obviously a touchdown guy at college, especially his last year at school. So, you like to see stuff like that. Um, so overall, I guess things that I liked when I looked at the tape from Brian Thomas was obviously his ability to kind of start and stop, his agility and control of his own body is great. These are some notes I took. His change of direction is pretty good. So after the catch, he's actually pretty good after the catch. He's not just a straight liner. Um, Obviously he's a really good red zone target. He can create separation down the field for sure. Um, Things that I'm a little bit concerned about is just his short and intermediate routes. His routes can be a little inefficient and just not as clean out of his routes. So when it comes to the short and intermediate, feels like he's much better down the field than he is in that short and intermediate, which again, teams are going to covet this a lot. I think he's really good again as a vertical threat and crossing routes, slant routes and crossing slant and nine routes, go routes. We like to see more production overall from other routes, the hitch routes, the corners and the posts, the comebacks, just to become more of a complete wide receiver. But that being said, there's plenty of wide receivers who are very successful. Excuse me. AJ Brown being one of them, who are just dominant at the nine routes and the crossing and slant routes. So, just again, would like to see him be a little bit more complete of a receiver in terms of his route running. But again, I keep saying it. He's not going to fall out of the first round, in my opinion. Teams are going to covet this. And when I think of fantasy and dynasty in general, obviously, if he's a first round receiver, we got to respect that. He's going to be a first round rookie draft pick. In terms of what he can be in fantasy, I feel like he's kind of better suited as, that X receiver, number two receiver, T. Higgins like of production, right? We saw T. Higgins have a year where he was a top 12 receiver, I believe in 2022, maybe it was 2021. I can't remember now off the top of my head. But, I don't necessarily see him being kind of the number one receiver on the team without a really, really good number two, or he's better suited as the 1B to a 1A or the number two receiver. Again, kind of like how T. Higgins is better, or Devontae Smith, who his production got better. Now I know it went from, a lot of it could have been his rookie to second year, but ultimately, like, his production was probably a little better with AJ Brown on the other side because it takes the pressure off of them a little bit. It doesn't allow them to, if Brian Thomas is better in man, right? They're just going to play zone against them. Now they have to respect someone else. Well, what if you have a guy who's really, really good against man on the other side and you can't play, zone, or sorry, really good, really bad or really good against zone, and you can't just play zone against them. You have to play man or something like that. Things that just make the defenses respect someone else on the team. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes. Another thing is, obviously he's really good at contested catches, going up and getting the ball. But one, you're going to need a lot of contested catches come down the field, over the middle as well. But if they're down the field, you're going to be willing. You're going to have a quarterback that's willing to throw down the field, and two, you're going to have a quarterback that's going to at least give you a chance to go up and get it. So let's say he goes to the Bills, and I think that's an amazing spot for him. He goes to someone like the Bills, or even the Cowboys, where he's the X receiver for the Cowboys, and CeeDee Lamb can move. I think spots like that are fantastic. Obviously, good quarterbacks that are willing to put the ball, push the ball down the field, that are fairly accurate and just good quarterbacks overall. And there's someone else on the other side that can take the pressure off of them in CeeDee Lamb or Stephon Diggs. So I see him being just like a solid in terms of fantasy, a top 15, top 20 receiver who's kind of the number two on his team. And maybe in a couple years he can take over as that number one. But if he's going to have the pressure of him being the guy for an offense, I just don't know if it's going to work out. So I could be wrong, of course, and we just never know with guys like this. So that's Brian Thomas Jr. for you guys. Again, some things I like, particularly contested catch. Obviously, his size and his ability to kind of stretch the field a little bit, and some other things that I want to see a little bit more out of. But again, a lot can change, and the fact that he got better over the course of his college career is also awesome to see. So there you have it, guys. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comments what you think about Brian Thomas Jr. If you think I'm just way off base. Right now I kind of have him as like my wide receiver 5 or 6 in that range. Because again, you got to respect the draft capital. I prefer a guy like Troy Franklin over him. I think Troy Franklin can kind of develop into, a team's best receiver. Whereas I think, again, Brian Thomas may be suited as the 1B or wide receiver 2 on the team. So, again, let me know in the comments what you think. We'll be putting out more of these, more receivers, running backs, and tight ends. And as always, subscribe to catch those. We'll catch you guys next time.